I have taken for my text today a verse from the Gospel of Mary. In fact, two verses. For the child of humanity is within you. Follow it. Those who seek it will find it. Go then and proclaim the good news of the realm. Today's reading from John's Gospel begins with the familiar image of a vine. It is interesting to note that the focus of this story is on the importance of remaining attached to the vine if we wish to be fruitful. In this reading, we have the human Jesus likening a fruitful life to that of a bountiful grapevine. I can hear the questions that people are now probably asking themselves. How can we draw a comparison between two quite different objects, grapes and people? We need to recognise that the human Jesus has spoken previously of good trees bearing good fruit. So it's an image that he continues to use. The important question is not only what does this mean for the members of John's community of faith at this time, but equally important, what does this story mean for us in the 21st century? What message can we take away from this story? At the first International Conference of Common Dreams for Progressive Christians in 2007, which was held in Sydney at Pitt Street Church, Bishop John Shelby Spong was the keynote speaker. During one of his speeches, he exhorted this message. He said that all preachers should have erected behind them in the pulpit an illuminated sign that continued to flash, and it used the word metaphor, metaphor, metaphor. So what does the term mean, metaphor? The dictionary definition of this term explains it as a figure of speech in which a word or a phrase is applied to an object or action which it is not literally applicable. Let me give you an example of what a metaphor is. An example that I learned when I was quite young, listening to the wireless. It wasn't a radio in those days. It's not from theology, but it's from a verse of a song by Hoagy Carmichael called Stardust. Some of you will remember it. Remember the lines. And now the purple dusk of twilight time steals across the meadow of my heart. High up in the sky, the stars climb, always reminding me that we're apart. Now, if we read this song literally, we must ask ourselves, do hearts have meadows? Do stars climb? In reality, they don't, but in a sense of expressing feelings, perhaps they do. I remember many years ago writing a poem, and I used the term my memories leading me down the corridors of my mind. Do minds have corridors? Perhaps not literally, but they do metaphorically. Do the words of this song help you understand the feelings and emotions of the writer? And does this open up other possibilities for you? And that's what the writer is trying to achieve. Does this enhance your understanding of the writer's message? What are your feelings when you hear a particular message? Later on, in one of the other verses, is the phrase, leaving me a song that will not die. Do songs have life? Many of us would say, yes, they do. We have all experienced that very special line in a song which brings back not just the memory, but the feelings we experienced at the time. A further meaning of the word metaphor is that it is a thing regarded as representative or symbolic of something, especially something abstract. And this is perhaps the meaning we need to use when we're looking at the Bible stories as metaphor. How often have we heard the catch cry, "It is only a metaphor"? In reality, metaphors have a far greater reach in meaning than does the literal interpretation of a single story. Let me provide you with an example of metaphor in the parable of Jesus when he was feeding the multitudes. There are two stories in the Bible, one about the feeding of the 4,000 and the other about the feeding of 5,000. You will be familiar with the details of these stories, I'm sure. And in the feeding of the 5,000, there are 5,000 people who have come to listen to Jesus. And by the end of the day, many are tired and showing the signs of hunger. But they are in a barren, isolated place, and there is no food except a child's lunch, consisting of 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. The story goes on to tell us of Jesus requesting his disciples to ask all the people to sit down on the ground and be prepared to eat. As he begins to break the bread and the fish and offer it to the multitude, the story concludes that even with these meagre rations, Jesus provides enough food for all to be nourished, and there is even food left over. If we read this story as a literal interpretation, we have to explain how Jesus achieved this feat. Was it a miracle, as some people would like to believe? And was Jesus able to perform, in a way, a piece of magic without the twitch of the nose like Samantha? Or did Jesus make those who were hiding food under their garments feel so guilty and that pressured them to bring food to light? Let us now examine this story as metaphor to see if we can discover if we can open up other possibilities of meaning. It is my firm belief that this story has a far deeper meaning. I believe that Jesus is conveying a message, and the message is this: there are enough resources to feed all people if only we are prepared to share what we have. This is the message about the importance of distributive justice. The story also tells us that after we distribute the shared resources, there will be a surplus. If we read it as metaphor, this surplus can be shared with others. This is a profound message of Jesus for today's world when we read it as metaphor. I was shocked recently to read that in 2017, a study was conducted by the Food Bank Australia. And the Chief Executive Officer, Brianna Casey, reports that more than 1 in 5 children in Australia live in a food-insecure household. Further, that 1 in 3 parents, 32% of the study, say that their children do not get enough to eat at least once each month. The main cause of household food insecurity, 52%, is the rising cost of living, which often forces parents to choose between paying bills and feeding the family. Many parents, in fact 9 out of 10 in this category, skip meals so as their children will have enough to eat, and this occurs on a weekly basis for many of these families. Food security reduces stress in families, and it promotes positive, healthy, growth-promoting social relationships because people who feel secure are more likely to reach out to others with love. The recent Royal Commission into the banking and finance institutions has revealed that the primary motivation of these organisations has not been for a more just society. The investment advice in many cases was primarily made to increase the profits of the organisation, at times to the detriment of the investor. We are witnessing worldwide a rise of autocratic leaders in politics and in business. Governments, and America is a prime example, is reflecting this trend. Many commentators are suggesting that there is a deliberate plan to remove democracy and replace it with autocratic capitalism. Whatever happened to our belief in Lincoln's democratic statement? Government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Whatever happened to a compassionate concern for others? Where does that fit within these areas? Where are the values that were espoused by Jesus of Nazareth? So we can see how powerful the message of Jesus can be for today's world when we read the Bible as metaphor. But the most important question is, how can we as friends of Jesus address this dilemma? Firstly, let us turn to today's gospel story and explore it not literally but as metaphor in our attempt to find its wisdom message. Before we explore the metaphorical message, it may be of help to us to understand that John's community at this time was splitting apart with divisions. It was splintering. They were suffering leakage as people were leaving the Jesus movement. The Jewish community rejected the Jews who came over to the Jesus movement. They were no longer included in community festivals, nor could they socialise with or marry Jewish girls. As a consequence, there is considerable slippage, and many of the new followers of Jesus are turning back to Judaism because it impacts on their everyday life. As a result, we find in John's Gospel, he sounds the warnings to those backsliders that they are turning their back on the light of the world. Further, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can have access to the Father, God, but through Jesus. These are not words of Jesus, these are words of the writer of John's Gospel, and an attempt to save the community from splitting apart. Hence, many of John's stories are aimed at trying to keep the community from turning back to Judaism. This in large part accounts for the emphatic statements in the Gospel. And according to John, about the divine power of Jesus and his relationship with God. Now, today's Gospel story begins with an image that would be very familiar to the community that John was addressing. The story's focus is not on differentiating this vine from others, but the need to remain in the vine if you wish to bear fruit. The Apostle Paul also speaks of the fruit of the Spirit. So the image of the vine is useful when examining our behaviour as a state of our being. The gospel story refers directly to Jesus and the community of faith. Hence, its metaphorical message is useful for us in the political, economic and social context of the 21st century. The writer of this message is imploring us to understand that fruitfulness depends on us remaining, or even the term abiding, which is a far more intimate term, abiding in the vine, the language of intimacy, because it infers a continuing relationship of closeness. A just world depends on how we value others, not just by our words, but also by our actions. So often today we hear preachers, myself included, talking about recognising the spirit of the sacred energy we call God in the broader community. The question this raises is this: if God is encountered primarily in the world and not in the church, what is the purpose of belonging to a faith community? Simply put, in the light of the gospel message we've heard today, a faith community will encourage us in the importance of practicing how to live with love and integrity. In this faith community, in St. Michael's, we can safely practice all the characteristics that relationships of quality require. We can practice hospitality. We can practice respect. We can practice humility. We can practice conversation and disagreement. We can practice being community and the disciplines and qualities of being a public body, so that we can grow and enact the virtues of life in a way that challenges and inspires others to do likewise. We can be the group that that practice these tasks to refine them so that people will look at us and say, that's what we would like to be like. As the branches, in fact, probably the most appropriate term is canes. Vines don't have branches, they actually have canes. But as the branches of the vine depend on their fruitful life on the quality of the rootstock, we too must continue to incorporate, through our spiritual relationship with Jesus, the values that nurture positive personal relationships. This is the message of the gospel today. Only then can we make it possible for a just society that recognises the values, the contribution of all living creatures can make to society. Praise be to the God of Jesus, whose Spirit dwells within us all. Amen. Amen, brothers and sisters. Amen. Let us now say together an affirmation of faith. Somewhere, someone is kind when others are unkind. Somewhere, someone shares with another in need. Somewhere, someone refuses to hate while others hate. Somewhere, someone is patient and waits in love. Somewhere, someone returns good for evil. Somewhere, someone serves another in love. Somewhere, someone is calm in a storm. Somewhere, someone is loving everybody. Is that someone you? Let us take a moment to celebrate the Spirit within each other. May a heart of peace rest with you. Let us now share that peace with our neighbours.